Good evening, Greater Metro West, New Jersey. My name is Ilana Wilf-Tansman, and I'm a member of Federation's Anti-Racism Task Force. And together with Emily Gantman, Chair of Federation's Young Family Programming Committee, we want to welcome you to tonight's workshop. And we want to thank Federation and the Ted and Maxine Family Fund for the gift of PJ Library. We really love our PJ Library books. Through virtual programming like this, young family, hands-on volunteer and advocacy opportunities, and more, Federation, Nextdoor, and PJ Library work together to help families like ours make connections and friends, all while building Jewish community. In 2023, our Jewish Federation is turning 100 and Israel is turning 75. We will celebrate with a year of special events and programs for the entire Greater Metro West community, beginning with our centennial mission to Israel in July of 2023. My husband, Brett, and I are bus captains, and Emily Gantman and her husband are co-chairs of the Centennial Mission, and we're so excited. It's going to be a once-in-a-century experience to travel with our entire community. We hope that you will all join us for amazing activities that are being planned. In the follow-up email that you'll be getting tonight, there'll be a link, and we hope that you'll sign up to be alerted when registration begins in June. And be sure to tell all of your friends. Tonight, we are thrilled to have Megan Madison and Jessica Rowley, the creators and authors behind First Conversations, a series of books for children to grasp topics including race, gender, and consent, and for adults to engage in further discussion on these topics. We've heard from some parents in our community that they need support talking to their kids about challenging topics, including race. We hope that you find this workshop that this workshop gives your family just one tool to develop the skills that you need to keep these conversations going year round. I know that for my family, we already have some of these books and they've been incredible tools talking to our 6-year-old, 4-year-old, and even for our 4-month-old to look at the beautiful illustrations in the books. There are more resources out there. Please check out PJ Library's resource page, which will be shared in the event's follow-up email. In advance of Juneteenth, the anniversary of George Floyd's murder, and just this weekend's shootings in both Buffalo and Dallas, we know that these conversations come up and also that it's important to have them year round. This event also furthers our Federation's commitment to educating the community on race and racial justice through the Community Relations Committee's Anti-Racism Task Force. We are committed as a federation to combating racism, not only because it impacts many within our community on a personal level, but also because as a community, we are committed to educating ourselves and fighting all forms of hate. Just as we hope that others not in the Jewish community will learn about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism and join with us in fighting against it, so too should we be proactive in learning and supporting our neighbors. Through Federation and our agencies, we work to provide diverse programming to meet all of our community's needs, and tonight is just one example. We look forward to bringing you more in the future. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Megan and Jessica and thank them for joining us this evening. Over to you.
We're so honored and really just happy to be here with you tonight and grateful that so many of you showed up. It's late. Many of you are parents. I know that I usually crawl into bed around 8:30, so we'll see how this goes. But we wanted to learn a little bit more about you before we get started. And I think this first question will help us just frame the conversation from where you are. And hopefully both questions will just get you in the mood to talk about what we're talking about tonight. So the first one is easy. I'm going to paste it in the chat and you can just answer it in the chat. I say it's easy, but I do forget the ages of my children on a regular basis. But yes, please just share the ages of your youngest child, the youngest child you work with. I'm saying youngest because we really are focused on young children in this conversation. And so it can also be a grandchild. It can be whomever you are thinking about this evening as we're having this conversation. So I'm seeing 5 to 7, I'm seeing 6, lots of 5s, lots of 3s. Oh, thank you. 2 to 3, youngest is 4, some 7-year-olds, some 8-year-olds. Youngest child is 37. And the youngest you work with is 2. All right, so it looks like we're all thinking about young children today, even some babies. That is wonderful. So the next question is a poll, which I'm going to launch right now because I can do that. Okay, there we go. And that was, this one is going to require a little more thinking, and you can start to answer as you read, but I'm going to explain a little bit what each one of these means if they're new to folks. So this is a question that will kind of hopefully connect your own experiences talking about race as a child yourself to our conversation today, which is about being a grown-up and having these conversations with young children. So did you grow up learning to be colorblind? So that means you may have heard grown-ups in your lives say things like, we don't see color, or everyone is the same inside, or we don't talk about race, and we don't need to because everyone's equal and everyone is the same. Or maybe you grew up color aware. So this could mean that race was brought up in your home in direct ways, and maybe the adults in your life did respond if you had questions, or they noticed that you had questions and they brought it up and they answered your questions about race. Or maybe you grew up justice oriented. So beyond color awareness, not only did you learn to talk about and ask about race, but maybe you learned to actively recognize and act on race-related injustices that were happening in your world. Maybe it was a combination, none of the above, or if it was something completely different, you can share that in the chat. And I'll just give folks a little more time to think about that and to answer. And it's slowing down, so I know not everyone, oh, it picked up again. Every time I say it slows down, it picks up because people are like, oh, this is my chance, I gotta do it. I know not everybody can do the poll. So yes, please share in the chat. Thank you, color aware. All right, I'm gonna call it. We're at 78%, and I'm gonna share the results. So interesting, yeah, it looks like a lot of us grew up with a combination. Most of us grew up colorblind, 27%, about 14% color aware, about 5% justice oriented, and then a combination of 2 or 3 of these, 32%. And that's always interesting to me because we don't know what that means for you specifically, but for me, it meant that I had a really cool teacher that I thought was really cool, and she was very justice oriented, and so she was the person in my life who was incredibly influential, who was more justice oriented, whereas the more sort of like, you know, the staple people in my life, like family, were more colorblind. So let's just keep that in mind as we learn and talk more together today. And so now that we know a little bit about you, we're going to tell you a little bit about us. And I'm talking a lot right now because Megan likes when I go first.
I do.
So I'm going to keep going. And I am here in this picture in the middle wearing my after school program t-shirt. And I'm about 5 years old. And I remember being one of only a few white children in my elementary school, in my junior high, and my high school. In Washington, D.C. public schools. But that proximity to diversity did not mean that I had a clear understanding of race. It did not mean that I knew what racism was or that anybody was talking to me about all of the things that I was noticing from a very young age. So looking back, like I mentioned, I was raised colorblind because I did hear those things like, we're all the same inside, from most of the grown-ups in my life. And I did believe that. I believed what I was being told, that we're all equal and we're the same inside. But there was this major disconnect between that and what I was noticing in the world. And that idea didn't line up with how people of color were being treated and how systems like my school and my neighborhood were set up. And I was seeing these unfair patterns that needed explanation. It was very confusing. I remember being very confused, and I don't know if the grown-ups in my life would have answered my questions because I didn't ask them. I didn't feel like I had the language to even construct those questions because nobody talked about it. And I also felt in the air that it was a very taboo topic, and I was the kind of child that didn't want to upset people. And that changed when I became an adult. But I definitely was that kind of kid. So fast forward now, I work at Brooklyn Public Library. I was a preschool teacher before that. I'm a mom of 2 young children. And I just knew that I needed to talk to my kids differently in a way that was more intentional about race and racism, and that just raising them in a diverse neighborhood and sending them to a global majority school was not enough. And along my journey, I met Megan, thank goodness. And she came to do workshops at the library about how to talk about race and gender and bodies. And what I learned in these workshops, it was a huge turning point for me in my parenting. And it really just demystified like how you do this. I knew I needed to, I just didn't really know how. And I saw that other parents and educators felt the same way that I did. They needed more information about how we do this and why we do this. And that was really the impetus for writing these books together.
I love hearing that story. It feels kismet that our paths crossed. I also did not grow up talking a lot about race and racism. My parents were divorced, so I grew up in 2 homes, one with my white mom and one with my Black dad. And in neither of those homes were we having conversations about race and racism and anti-racism. They both adhered to that kind of colorblind strategy. And so then when I got older, I went to college. My first job out of college, I became a preschool teacher in an amazing early childhood center in Chicago called the Carol Robertson Center for Learning, which is actually named after one of the 4 young girls who was killed in a Birmingham bombing. I started working there and I saw systemic racism in an urban environment for the first time. I grew up in a small town in northern Michigan, and so I'd heard about it, but I'd never really experienced it. And I was also being trusted with the lives of 20 Black and brown 4-year-olds. And their parents and their caregivers and their aunties and their grandmas would trust me with their lives for 9 hours a day, Monday through Friday. And I was like, something's really wrong and really unfair. And I have no idea how to talk about it, but I'm responsible and I got to figure it out. So I connected with this organization called Teachers for Social Justice. And they were doing this big curriculum fair because I thought, if I'm going to figure this out, I just need the right children's book. So I took myself to a fair, and they didn't have the children's book I was looking for, but they did have this fantastic book called Anti-Bias Education for Young Children and Ourselves. And I looked up the authors and I stalked them at conferences. I sat in the front row and I basically made them become my mentors. And they were like, okay, they'll mentor me. So Louise Sturman Sparks and Julie Olson Edwards took me under their wing, and with their coaching and mentoring and a lot of support from other people, especially other Black women, I got better at it. I don't think I'll ever feel excellent at it, but I have gotten better at it. And so it feels really good to now be at a point in my journey where at least I got good enough that, it helped you out that one day. And now look at us here we are.
It helps me every day. And this is Isabel Roja, who is not here, obviously, but she is our incredible illustrator. So we wanted to shout her out as well. And now we have another little interactive thing for you to do called a Padlet. So some of you might know what this is. I'm going to put the link in the chat. This is just a way to sort of collaborate and answer some questions together. It's anonymous. I'm going to share the Padlet so we can all see it. And I'll explain it a little, but if you get it right away, you can definitely start adding your responses. So yeah, Megan and I often talk about how this is the book that we wish we'd had as a child. And thinking about ourselves as children was really, really helpful in writing this book. And it was also helpful in imagining how we would talk to children as adults about race. We did a lot of like inner child speaking. and delving. So we want to do this exercise with you to think about yourselves as children and what you may have already known about race and talking about race from a young age. But I do want to acknowledge that it can be very hard sometimes to talk about our childhoods for many different reasons. And so if that is at all hard or traumatic for you, you do not have to participate in this part of the workshop. So I see some folks have just been answering already. So there are 3 questions and they're kind of related. You can start answering as I'm talking if you want. And these are adapted from Beverly Daniel Tatum. So the first question is, do you have an early memory related to race, and how old were you? And you don't have to share the memory. You can just say yes or no, or yes and how old you were. And then, do you have an emotion attached to that memory? And what is that emotion, if you can remember it and if you can name it? If you think back, you might be able to retrospectively think, oh, that's really what I was feeling. Or you may even just remember the feeling. And so the other follow-up question, and they're all related, is, did you talk to a grown-up about it at the time? So, and why or why not? So you've got this memory, you've got this thing that happened, it was somehow related to race, you were feeling a certain way about it, and did you talk to a grown-up about it? Did a grown-up notice that you were feeling that way? And then why or why not? Why did you talk to the grown-up about it? What was it about that grown-up that made you feel like you could? Or what was it about that grown-up that made you feel that you couldn't? Or just like I was saying before, I felt it in the air. I felt in the air that this was something that might upset people, or I might say the wrong thing. So yeah, for those who can't see the Padlet, I can start to read some of these aloud. So we've got some no's in whether we have a race-related memory, but we have a lot of different ages, 6, and it's very hard to remember early childhood, especially very young, because before we have language, sometimes those memories are not really there. Some 8 and 5, 4 and 5, early 20s. So lots of different people saying yes, and lots of this happening in childhood. Some happiness, some fear, some sadness, embarrassment, discomfort, confusion, no feeling attached, now feeling shame, embarrassment, guilt, confusion, lots of confusion, shame and hurt and embarrassment and curiosity. And then, did you talk to a grown-up at the time? Why or why not? No, because I was a grown-up. Yes, my parents, they were also involved in the situation. I didn't know what to say. No, I didn't know what to say. I didn't have the words to express my feelings. I don't think my feelings would have been okay to the grown-ups in my life at the time. I never felt I could share. Yes, but I wasn't satisfied with the answer. Also was a grown-up. That's an interesting thing. We should do this as an activity about being grown-up too. All right, so I think it seems like a lot of people have those kinds of memories and have some feelings attached to them. And I just want you to think about what this exercise made you realize about your own experience talking about race when you were young. Maybe something you wish had been different, or maybe something positive that you can build off of in your own parenting. So for example, for me, this exercise made me, when I did it the first time, made me realize that I wish somebody had asked me what I noticed about race and racism in moments where it was kind of something was happening. So that sentence, what do you notice, is something I use in my parenting practice a lot. I know that that's something I needed. I use it a lot when I'm starting a conversation with my kids, because it allows me to start from where they are, because I'm asking them that kind of open-ended question. All right, thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to jump back to our slides now.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Oops. Okay.
So, why talk about race with young children? And if we'll talk a little bit about this now, but if more questions come up, feel free to use that Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar. And we'll collect some questions throughout and hopefully have a little bit of time at the end to address some of your specific questions. But overall, why talk about race and why talk about race with young children is we know that children are noticing skin color, race, and racism. We know that from our own personal experiences when we just did that Padlet. We know that that's true from the research. And we also know it from our real lives. The children that you were mentioning in the chat at the beginning of this session will learn about what happened in Buffalo. And they will learn about it from the other kids at school, or from the news, or from the internet, or they will learn about it with you. We also know that we can help prevent children from developing racial bias. The person who committed that atrocious act was not born holding those beliefs. That happened over time. And we as a community can prevent that from happening by investing and being brave in having these conversations early and often. We also believe that children deserve support to navigate their feelings about race and racism. Taking the what recently happened in Buffalo as an example of that, I'm a grown-up, I'm 34 years old, and it's taken me 3 or 4 full days just to begin to process the rage and the grief and the terror that are in my body as a result of hearing that news. And I don't think any child should have to feel those feelings alone. I believe that every single child deserves a whole bunch of grown-ups who are ready to be brave with them and feel those feelings right alongside them. And also noticing not all of our feelings about race and racism are bad. I love being Black. Being Black is so fun and cool. And I also deserve a whole bunch of grown-ups in my life if I'm a Black child. And I also still deserve it as a 34-year-old, a whole bunch of grown-ups in my life who want to celebrate my Blackness with me. And I think, you know, the original planning for this event was thinking about how to prepare for Juneteenth, which is coming up, which is all about celebrating Black freedom. So what an opportunity to start to practice those skills about talking about race and racism now, so that your entire family is ready to celebrate Black joy and Black freedom a couple months from now. And I also think kids are really good at changing the world. If you've met a 2-year-old, they've probably said, "That's not fair" at some point. And I think young children have a lot to offer us in their clarity about what is right and what is wrong, and what our responsibilities are, and how we can use our imaginations and our relationships to make the world a better place. That's my top 4 reasons to talk about race with kids.
So Megan, will you give me a thumbs up if you can hear the sound when I click this next slide? Okay,
I
cool.
will, happily.
I always have to play it to the end because that last little sound is my favorite. So that is obviously a very cute video of a baby, young toddler reading our book.
A baby named Justice.
A baby named Justice, that's right. And I show this video just to get everybody feeling good, but also as a helpful reminder that children are never too young to talk about race. And that conversation looks different depending on a child's age. With a toddler, maybe it's just exploring the images that they see in this book, hearing some of the words. Maybe with a baby or a toddler, it's you practicing talking about race before children can respond with harder questions. It also depends on their development, their abilities, their intersectional identities, but no matter what it looks like or where you start, it's never too early. So what does the research say? What do they know about race and at what age? I'm going to drop a resource in the chat. That's a wonderful tool you may have seen before from the Children's Community School that has all of the citations for the research. And as a librarian, I like those citations. And we're going to just talk about it a little bit. So between 0 and 1, babies are starting to notice skin color. They are grouping the people in their lives by skin color. So they're seeing color and they're not, in fact, born colorblind, as we sometimes hear people say. But you might be saying, that's just seeing color. It doesn't have any meaning. But by 2, they're already starting to think about and come up with ideas about people's behavior based on race. And that is really the beginning of the formation of racial stereotypes. So even if they don't have the language to express the ideas, they are forming in the background. There's a lot of research that shows that. Then at 2.5, there were studies that showed that children are using race sometimes to choose their playmates. And so now children are beginning to act on some of that bias that's been forming in the background. So you can maybe think about whether you've seen that pattern play out in your child's classroom or at the playground or at birthday parties, all the many places that we are with big groups of children. And then between 4 and 5, when language skills are more developed, they begin to express some of that racial prejudice verbally. So it's been forming, they may start to act on it, and then start to express it as they have more language to do so. And this is when adults will often shut it down and just not talk about it if it comes up. That is the moment. So again, reflect on whether you've ever heard a child say something about race and how the grown-ups around that child, maybe even you, responded. So this was mind-blowing for me when I first saw this graphic. And it made me think, if I already know that it's something my children are noticing and talking about and thinking about, then really the only question is, do I want to be a part of that conversation as the trusted grown-up in their life? And this is just one of many of the things that they're thinking about and noticing. But it's a pretty important one, and it's one that gets very confusing. Confusing was the main word in that Padlet. If we don't act as a guide, as we do as parents on so many other topics. So why wouldn't we talk about this one?
All right, so let's practice. I'm going to read a quote that's a real life quote from a real life kid. I just want you, as I read the quote, to imagine yourself in that moment and start to imagine what you might say or do if you were there. All right, ready? What would you do if you were sitting down to snack time with a 4-year-old who asked you, "Is my skin brown because I drank chocolate milk?" How would you feel in that moment? What might you say? How confident do you feel right now as I put you in this position of trying to think about what to say? Does it feel easy or hard? Let's try another one. All right, now imagine yourself tucking a kid to bed. And as you're about to turn off the light, the kid asks, "Daddy, what color is Joe Biden?" What would you say? How would you feel? How confident do you feel about that response? All right, now let's go to the playground. Imagine you're at the playground and you overhear a group of kids, one of whom says, "You can't be Superman because Superman has white skin." How would you feel? what would you do? How confident do you feel? All right, we've got one more. Keep breathing. Maybe take an extra deep one if you want. All right. Now imagine a child that you love. Maybe even picture their face in your mind's eye. Their cute little nose, their sweet ears, that smile. And imagine them saying, "That's not her mommy," because they have different skin colors. How would you feel in that moment? What would you say or do? All right, that was a ton of self-awareness. You have a ton more information about yourself now after that little exercise. And now what I want you to do is find something to write with and just jot down if that exercise brought up any other examples from your own life. Maybe something that's happened in a relationship with a child that's important to you in your classroom, with your nibbling, or maybe something that happened in your own childhood. And that's going to be the first scenario that after this webinar, not tonight, tomorrow, when you call your best friend and talk about what you learned tonight, you can talk about that scenario and you can talk it through together.
So now we would love to share our book with you. And one of the reasons that we do a read aloud for grown-ups, although some of you may have some kids with you, we don't know, is that it can be helpful to see this book modeled. Part of my training in librarianship is modeling different kinds of books all the time and seeing them modeled. How you might read it with a young person, how you might ask the questions and wait for a response. And we also know, and this is incredibly exciting, that many of you received our book as part of registering for this workshop. And that's amazing. And we would love to offer you some encouragement to read it with your kids if you haven't already. So maybe if you haven't already, this will make it a little easier. So I'm going to share the book, and then I think, Megan, you're going to start.
Can't wait. I think it's going to feel really good to read this book on a day like today. All right. Our Skin, a first conversation about race by Megan Madison. That's me. Jessica Rowley. That's you. And our friend Isabel Rojas. There's a little message to grown-ups on the inside, but we'll skip that for now. All right, here we go. We all have skin. It comes in different colors. What color is your skin? And feel free to write into the chat as we read along.
Our friends have different skin tones. So do the people in our families. What about in your family?
In my family, there's lots of different skin tones. Dark brown and light brown, peachy and freckly. How about in your family, Jessica?
In my family that lives in this home, 3 of us have olive skin, and then 1 of us has really peachy pink skin and a pink nose all the time.
Aww. Our skin is beautiful, strong, and important, just the way it is. What do you love about your skin?
I love that my skin gets darker in summer. I'm about to go to the beach, and even though I will have lots of sunblock on, I could just use a little layer of darker olive.
I'm with you. I cannot wait to get a tan in the summer. It's coming. Summer is coming.
We get our color from something smart inside our bodies called melanin that protects our skin from the sun. You have melanin too. We all do. Everybody has just the right amount for them.
The darker your skin, the more melanin you have. The lighter your skin, the less melanin you have. Melanin makes our skin many beautiful shades, from dark to light. What do you call your unique skin color? I think maybe I'll call mine cinnamon.
I've said olive now 6 times. I feel like I need another word. I'm going to think about it. Maybe I'll get inspired by ice cream. We may use color words to describe people like black and white. Sometimes we say people of color to talk about all the groups of people who aren't white.
Our world has so many different groups of people, so there are lots of words we use. Black, indigenous, Asian, white, Arab, Pacific Islander, African American, Latinx, biracial, and so many more. What groups do you belong to? What are some groups that you belong to? You can write them into the chat.
Skin color can't tell you much about what people are like, what they know, what foods they think are yummy, what their favorite books are, or even where they were born. Just by looking at someone, we can't tell who they are on the inside, but sometimes people try to anyway.
A long time ago, way before you were born, a group of white people made up an idea called race. They sorted people by skin color and said that white people were better, smarter, prettier, and that they deserve more than everybody else. That isn't true or fair at all. But it's a story that has been told for a long time.
I don't like that story at all. It doesn't sound fair or right. When people believe this untrue story about race, that's called racism. Racism is also things people do and the unfair rules they make about race so that white people get more power and are treated better than everybody else. Racism happens in lots of big and small ways. It's all around us, even if we don't always notice it. And there's that word I love, notice. So what do you notice about this page? What do you think is happening? You could write some observations in the chat or just think about it. What do you notice?
I noticed that there's some kids. How many kids do you see?
I see 1, 2, 3, 4. And Alana says rules being applied in different ways based on color of skin.
Yeah. Okay, so there's 4 kids. What is the skin color of the 4 kids?
I see a child with a pink shirt who has brown skin, and another kid with a blue tank top who is blonde with white skin. And yeah, the two other kids also have white skin.
Mm-hmm. And what's
And
everybody doing? Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's a teacher or a librarian.
Mm-hmm.
And Aliza says, I see a grown-up making an assumption about each child without investigating anything.
Mm.
That's something that my daughter noticed too, and it made her really upset. She said she
Mm-hmm.
didn't think the teacher was really paying attention and
Mm-hmm.
just came up with an idea that one kid, the kid with the brown skin, was doing something wrong and wasn't even looking at the other kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I see Jamil in the chat says the black kid have to be quiet and the white kids get to make noise. Yeah, that's not fair. That's
No,
not
that's not
fair.
fair. And the white girl on the bottom step looks like she's trying to figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's definitely taking a moment to notice. I wonder what she's going to do.
Me too. Should we find out?
Yeah,
I forget whose page is it.
I
Do
have
read
no
this?
idea.
No.
Why don't
Okay,
you?
I'll read this one. Racism can be a rule. Like if someone says only friends with white skin can play. Racism can be an idea, like thinking princesses only have blonde hair. Racism can be a way we've done things for a long time, like how there aren't as many books written about people of color.
Racism can be on purpose, like calling a person of color a mean name because of their skin color. Racism can be by mistake, like if the same friend always has to play the bad guy.
Racism hurts and is always unfair. That's why it's important to talk about it and do our part to make things better.
All the time, even right now,
Even
at
right now.
8:48.
Yes, at
At
8:48.
8:48. Oh my gosh, it's 8:49. All the time, even right now, people are in this Zoom working for racial justice by telling the truth, by sharing feelings in the chat, by treating people the way they want to be treated. And I know we can't hear you, but Megan and I would love you to join us in bravely saying on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3.
That's not
Not right.
right.
By marching in protest, by singing songs that bring us together, by changing unfair rules, by teaching, helping, learning, and listening. We can do it too.
We can, and we will.
And we will. The end. Thank you so much for all of your thoughts in the chat and for listening. We are going to take a moment to reflect.
Yeah. So if you still have that writing utensil, you can pull it out again. This is just a little bit of silent time to think to yourself. Did you hear something that was uncomfortable to say or to hear while we were reading the book? Or what is something new that you learned or heard expressed in a new way?
So we are covering a lot today. It's always amazing how much fits in an hour. And you may be on lots of different points in this journey already, but we really wanted you to leave with some ideas, some things you can start right away. So the first thing is talking about race is okay at any age. There is a developmentally appropriate way to start talking about race at any age. Because as we learned, they are already thinking about it, noticing it, and talking about it. So you have permission to join in with their conversation. And I also feel compelled as a parent who is doing this to mention that it can be very hard. And one of the reasons I found it hard and still find it hard is that I didn't have a lot of practice and I didn't have a lot of models for how to do this with young children. So be kind to yourself. It's okay if it's not perfect. You know, this was not something I could like call my mom and ask her parenting advice on. She had no idea what I was talking about. So that makes it extra hard. Another hard thing is that it can be awkward or embarrassing if a child makes a race-related comment in public. That might have been some of your reflections when we were coming up with those different scenarios. That was mine. But if they do, it's very important not to shut them down. That is the moment that they learn that this is something that's not okay to talk about, or that there's something wrong with having brown skin, or so many other conclusions that they might come to on their own. So talk about it later if you can't in the moment. Try to affirm how curious they are in the moment. You can say, I love how curious you are. Let's talk about it more in the car. And then make sure that you do. And that really sends the message that it's okay to have questions and to talk together about race, which is very, very different from the colorblind approach. So how do you start? I think a great starting point, if this is very new for you or if your children are very young, is talking about skin color and tone. As we've mentioned, children are already noticing skin color from 6 months old. So like anything they're noticing, you want to give them accurate language to describe it, right? And you can do that during playtime, you can do it during story time, you can do it when they're already noticing things like shape and size and color of all the other things in the world. But I must add that this is not where the conversation ends. That is what we have been doing for a very long time, and it's not enough. Talking about skin color is a door opener. But if you remember from our poll questions, we want to move beyond colorblind, through color aware, and become justice oriented. So how do we do that? How do we talk about the harder parts of race and racism? And you saw in the book that we used the words fair and unfair a lot. And we use those words because those are words that young children really get. They've experienced fair and unfair things already from the beginning of their lives. My daughter could probably list them all out for you. And they need to learn about the world through their own feelings and through their own experiences. That's how most of us learn, but especially young children. And then, speaking of hard things, don't forget about the joy. And you may be saying, how can I find joy in something like what happened in Buffalo? And you can't. There are really hard parts of this conversation. And so Megan and I spent some time coming up with ideas to support parents and educators in that very specific hard conversation. And we couldn't spend too much time on it tonight because we wanted to talk about all the other things that we talked about, but I'm going to share a link in the chat right now with some very specific ways to do this with young children. If you're struggling to talk about Buffalo, as Megan said, they're going to find out about it, even very young children. If they're not going to find out about it, they're going to notice that something's in the air, that you might be feeling anxious or sad. So it's really important to just at least address the feelings that you're all feeling. So back to remembering the joy. It's a very large conversation, and so there are joyous parts. So talking about identities is joyful. Learning about melanin and describing skin tone, like the photos in this activity that I did at a school festival on Sunday. That was joyful all day long. Kids with lots of different skin tones being affirmed, looking at themselves in the mirror. And then even empowerment in action when we are really upset and hurting can be joyful, like the joy on my oldest kid's face in this picture at a protest march that we went to this weekend, when we found a group of people who shared a vision for what the world, shared our vision for what the world should look like. So joy is important with young children. You will lose their engagement if you don't bring creativity and joy to the conversation.
Mm. Thank you, Jessica. I needed those photos this evening. Yeah, and following in your beautiful modeling, we talk about race and racism so that we can take action. And we really recommend taking action collectively and locally. So that might mean at your library or in your synagogue or at your JCC. It might mean in your home with your family and your friends. It might mean connecting with a national organization. One example, we worked with an organization called Red, Wine, and Blue that's actively mobilizing suburban moms to push back against these book banning attempts that are happening across the country. There's no one right way or place to engage in activism, but we want to encourage you to take these conversations and turn them into action. One specific Buffalo related action is I do actually happen to have a colleague who is connected with that community. And I asked her in a meeting earlier this week how we could support. And she said at this particular moment, the kids and families in Buffalo need resources on how to support children in the wake of violence. And my guess is there might be people on this webinar tonight who have some resources about how to talk to kids when really scary things happen in our communities. So if you have any of those resources, please feel free to share them with me and Jessica, and we will make sure that they get to the community who needs them in this moment. And I think the last thing maybe I'll say is that we often say in these moments of tragedy, we tell kids to look for the helpers. And in the specific situation in Buffalo, the shooter killed many of the helpers. And so I think it's on us as the broader community to say, put on our little badge and say, Hineni, here I am the helper. So that every single child in this country, when they walk out of their front door tomorrow morning, they see us on the sidewalks, in the stores and in the classrooms and in the hallways. I'm telling them that we are here and we are here to keep you safe.
Thank you, Megan.
Mm-hmm.
And you are not alone. Like Megan was talking about, maybe you have community where you are. You have community with us now. We invite you to engage with us on social media, on Instagram. We have a website if you feel like there's a lot more, a lot that you heard tonight that you need to learn more about. And as we sort of predicted, we don't really have time for the Q&A, but I've been looking at the incredible questions that have been coming through. And so I would love to try to answer some of these on our social media in the coming week, because I think these are questions that would be helpful, not just for the people here, but for our entire community that we've been building. So we will be doing that. And we really thank you for those questions. And we will now pass it back. I'm going to get to the last slide. We do have other conversations. We talk about other stuff. So if you're interested, we talk about gender and consent in a very similar format. And we have a book coming out about love in December that we love. We love the book. And we want to shout out, before this is the last thing I'll say, Words Bookstore that partnered with the Federation to get our books to you. And I thought that this display that they did was just so cool and wanted to highlight it. So now I will pass back to you, Alana. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Jessica and Megan, for opening up this really important dialogue and for the incredibly powerful and helpful presentation. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. We know it's just the beginning and what a great start it was. Please look out for a brief follow-up survey coming to your inbox tonight, and stay tuned for our summer outdoors events and information about upcoming events for all throughout the year. And we hope to see you all again soon. Bye.